Welcome students to this week 10 lectures of soil science and technology, and in this lecture we will be starting the first topic, that is remediation of soil organic pollution. And in the last week of lectures, that means in the week 9 of lectures, you have learned about different types of organic pollutants. Specifically, we talked about different pesticides, herbicides, as well as different xenobiotics, which are responsible for different environmental pollutions. And then we talked about how they contaminate environment, specifically soil. And in this lecture, in this lecture we will be talking about this remediation of soil organic pollution. That means what are the different ways of remediating these organic pollutants. Obviously, remember that the available mechanisms are there are numerous available mechanisms, and obviously it will not be possible to cover each of them, but I will try to give you a basic overview, as well as I will try to touch the important mechanisms which we can employ to remediate these soil organic pollutions coming from different pesticides and other organic chemicals like xenobiotics. So let us start. So in this topic, or in this lecture, we will be basically covering the following concepts. These concepts are physical and chemical methods of remediation, and then we will talk about bioremediation, we will talk about phytoremediation, and then we will be talking about effect of aging on bioavailability of contaminants in the soil. So if we talk about the remediation of soil organic pollutions, organic pollutants can be cleared by modifying the agro-ecosystem. Specifically, when we talk about the organic pollution in agro-ecosystem, you can either remediate or clean those organic pollutant by modifying the agro-ecosystem. And there are three major processes which you can employ to achieve this goal of cleaning the organic pollutants from the ecosystem. These are mainly physical and chemical methods, and then bioremediation and phytoremediation. And we will be discussing these physical and chemical methods first, then we will be discussing bioremediation, and then we will be discussing the phytoremediation. So let us go ahead and see what is the trends of what is the trends, or what is the relation between time to achieve cleanup in years as well as cost to achieve the cleanup. So obviously this graph shows that, and it is clearly visible that as far as the cost is concerned, the high cost is involved in excavating any contaminated soil and then hauling them and then washing them. So this is the most expensive method which is available for cleaning the organic pollutants, following by excavating, haul, and then composting this organic compound. You know that due to the composting process, all the majority of the pollutant gets remediated or cleaned up. So this is another way, and another way of dealing with it is to heat in situ to decompose or organics. So basically, so these are the methods which are arranged in the order of their expensiveness. So you can see excavating, hauling, and washing. Obviously, it is the most expensive method, following by the excavating, hauling, and composting, and then heat in situ to decompose the organics. That means the organic chemicals and organic pollutants, followed by the in situ bioremediation or in situ biostimulation by adding nutrients, air, and or microbes. we will be talking about this later on. And then phytoremediation by rhizosphere breakdown, and then phytoremediation by plant uptake and removal, and then enhancing inactivation, and finally natural attenuation, which is the totally natural process of remediating the organic chemicals. So you can see that this basically shows the the order of or in the decreasing order of cost involved for cleanup. And but obviously, uh, although it is very expensive to excavate, haul and wash, it is very it is very rapid as compared to this natural attenuation. So obviously, as we go down from this excavating and hauling and washing to excavating, hauling and composting to all the way to natural attenuation process, it is slowing down the process. So obviously, the natural attenuation, although it is the least expensive method and it is less disruptive than that of the excavating, hauling and washing, obviously this natural attenuation is a very slow process, whereas this excavating, hauling and washing is a rapid process. So whenever you need a rapid rapid cleanup of organic pollutants from your agro ecosystem, and you don't have any you don't have any limitation resource wise, obviously the excavating, hauling and washing is the best process. So now you will have an idea about what is the trade off between time to achieve the cleanup and then the cost to achieve the cleanup. So you can take the best decision which one to practice based on your particular condition of organic pollution. So guys, I hope that this graph gives you some insight on how to select the best remediation practice for remediating soil organic pollution. So let us go ahead and see what are the important physical and chemical methods. Well, in the physical and chemical methods, we generally divide them into ex situ and in situ treatment. As you can see, ex situ means off the site, and in situ means on the site. So you can see here, ex situ, in the soil is excavated and transported in ex situ treatment, because we are excavating the soil from its own original original position and then transporting to some other places, and then that incineration, leaching and vacuum pumping etc. is done to address the pollutant. So these are ex situ treatments, and remember that ex situ is a highly expensive and disrupt the soil, but it is the only option when the soil is extremely polluted. So whenever the soil is extremely polluted, in situ in situ treatment may not be sufficient, and then we need some ex situ treatment to excavate the soil, to disrupt the soil and transport the soil to some other places for further treatment. And in comparison to ex situ treatment, in situ treatment uses same process as ex situ, however it reduces the excavation and transportation cost. So this excavation and transportation cost, which consist a huge amount of cost involvement, which involve a huge amount of cost for for ex situ treatment, is not present in situ treatment. However, the contaminants may be eliminated or immobilized in the soil. So this is the difference between ex situ treatment and in situ treatment. Obviously, again in the ex situ treatment, the soil is basically excavated and transported for treatment to some other site, and it is generally performed when the soil is extremely polluted. However, in situ treatment doesn't allow for excavation and transportation, so that that's why it is less expensive, and in the in situ treatment, contaminants may be eliminated or immobilized in the soil. So let us see some physical and chemical agents which are responsible for remediating the organic pollutants. One of them is called surfactant, and surfactant are compounds that lower the surface tension or interfacial tension between two liquids, between a gas and liquid, or between a liquid and solid. We have already discussed about the surface tension in our soil moisture lectures, so I am not going to detail in going to further discuss on the surface tension, but remember that these surfactants are basically they lower the surface tension between two liquids, between a gas and a liquid, or between say liquids and solid, and these surfactants may act as a detergent, wetting agents, emulsifiers, foaming agents, and dispersants. So generally the detergent which we use for cleaning our clothes and other washing purpose can be used as an important surfactants. So let us see how this surfactant works for for remediating the organic pollutant. So surfactants are as a typical structure. So the ability of surfactant to reduce the interfacial energy is related to the polar non-polar structure of their molecules. So you can see there this is a structure of a surfactant, and obviously you can see that the structure surfactant molecule consists of two different groups, a hydrophilic head. So this is the hydrophilic head and this is the hydrophobic tail. So this hydrophilic head is responsible for attracting the polar liquid such as water. However, this hydrophobic tail can attract the non-polar compounds like organic any oil or any organic pollutants which are non-polar in nature. So when we add these detergent or surfactants in an interface between interface between polar and non-polar phases. For example, when some non-polar organic compound or organic pollutants are mixed with polar solvent like water, then if we add these surfactants or detergents, it will it will reduce the energy on the interface between polar and non-polar phases, and it does it by a specialized kind of arrangement. As you can see here, whenever we add this type of detergents or chemical or surfactants in this interface between polar and non-polar phases, they arrange in such a way that this hydrophilic head or water loving head is arranged in the vicinity of water molecule, and this is an aqueous solution obviously. So all these hydrophilic heads will be arranged towards this aqueous solution, whereas this hydrophobic tail is arranged inside, so it should not get in touch with this aqueous solution. And this hydrophobic tail basically attracts these organic molecules or organic pollutants which are present in this solvent, in this aqueous solution, and basically it attracts, it binds with those organic pollutants, and then it removes all these organic chemicals. So a surfactant molecule, by its hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail, this dual structure of surfactant is essential for removing any particular non-polar organic compound which is present within a polar solvent like water. Or so this is how the surfactant works for removing the pollutants. So surfactants can be used to remove oil and hydrophobic compounds, and surfactant makes the pollutant available for further microbial degradation, and it dissolves the pollution which is then leached or pumped out. So this is the three ways through which surfactants can remove or remediate the organic chemicals from any contaminated agro-ecosystem. The second important important thing we should talk about is organoclase. Now you know that certain surfactants replace the metal cations in the clays. An example are quaternary ammonium compounds or QACs. These surfactants can replace the potassium in the clay. As you can see here, these are the soil colors of an untreated clay, and which contains potassium, which is attached or which is adsorbed onto the clay surface, and this is a quaternary ammonium compound, and this quaternary ammonium compound basically replaces the K, and ultimately it produces this modified clay. We call it organoclay, and this modified clay or organoclay attracts non-polar compounds and immobilize them until natural degradation takes place. So this is how these organoclays helps in remediation of organic pollutants from the environment. So this picture gives a snapshot of how these physical and chemical methods act for removing the organic pollutants from the soil. As you can see, our soil and water, as you can see here, let us let us consider there is an unsecured landfill where all the municipal solid waste and other solid waste are being dumped, and obviously there are some leaking wastes through which these leaches are contaminate. The important contaminants are basically coming to the groundwater, and this is basically the vadose zone, and this is the groundwater flow, as you can see. So this basically shows the plume of contaminant, and ultimately it is contaminating the groundwater. However, if we are injecting the soil modifier or quaternary ammonium compound, this quaternary ammonium compound will basically goes into this groundwater, and you can see here this is the soft tip zone, which is basically immobilized, which is characterized by this immobilization and degradation of contaminants. So, in the soft tip zone, in the presence of quaternary ammonium compound, these bacteria are basically multiplicate, and ultimately these bacteria degrade these contaminants, and ultimately clean water goes through down the gradient for drinking water pump, and ultimately the drinking water is pumped up from this groundwater. So again we are introducing the leaking wastes into the groundwater. However, we are also injecting the soil modifier or QAC, which is basically modified the soil and ultimately producing the organoclays, and these organoclays basically either helps in the degradation of helps in the degradation or attachment of organic pollutants within the organoclays, and also bacteria also degrades these organic chemicals, and ultimately this clean water goes, and ultimately the drinking water pumped from the groundwater. So this is how these physical and chemical methods work together. So let us go ahead and see what is okay. One more thing we want to talk, obviously this distribution coefficient, we have already talked about it in our previous lecture. Again, so I am just going through very quickly. So you know that Kd is the ratio of pollutant solved in soil to the one present in solution. So basically it takes this format of this formula of Kd is basically mg of contaminant per kg of soil over mg of contaminant per liter of solution, and obviously the higher the Kd values is the more the contaminant in soil than in solution, the stronger the pollutant is held by the soil and lesser it leaches. And organic matter rich soils are and organoclays have higher Kd, obviously that is why they can attract more organic chemicals as compared to other as compared to the soils which are devoid of organic matter, and this strongly absorbed pollutant is then naturally degraded by microbes. Now you can see here this is a mineral particle and these are the organic matter, and obviously there is a thin layer of water molecule which is basically polar, And in the polar water flame, you can see some non-polar hydrophobic organic molecules, and these non-polar organic molecules are adsorbed over the non-polar organic matter in a quite high concentration as compared to the mineral particles, which is basically as compared to the water also. So this shows basically the attraction between the hydrophobic organic matter to other organic other non-polar organic compounds, or in other words other non-polar organic pollutants. So, another important term is bioremediation. Now, bioremediation involves the use of enhanced plant and microbes to degrade and transform pollutants to non-toxic forms. So, whenever remember one thing, the terms bio comes from whenever we are adding, whenever we are remediating the soil pollution or any environmental pollution through the help of any biological organisms. Now, these biological organisms may be some microbes, some indigenous microbes or some microbes which we can introduce in that particular environment, or these bioremediation can be achieved through some plants, and we will be discussing those microbial bioremediation and plant bioremediation. The other name of plant bioremediation is basically phytoremediation, and we will discuss those. So, basically these microbes and plant transform the pollutants to non-toxic form, and we will see how they do it. So, let us see what are the major types of bioremediation. There are two major types of bioremediation. One is called intrinsic bioremediation, another is enhanced bioremediation. Now, intrinsic bioremediation also known as the natural attenuation, and enhanced bioremediation known as the engineered remediation. So, if you see the intrinsic bioremediation basically works on the principle that let nature takes its course. So, it is basically natural process, and it is the degradative activities affected by the indigenous microbes under the ambient condition, and no intervention to alter the aspects of the environment affecting microbial activity is there in case of intrinsic bioremediation. However, in case of enhanced bioremediation, since we are terming it as an engineered remediation, there are couple of ways we can engineer this enhanced bioremediation. One of the way is biostimulation. Now, biostimulation is basically alteration of the environment to enhance the activities affected by indigenous microbes, and bioaugmentation. Bioaugmentation is inoculation of organisms to induce a a type of catalysis not displayed by the indigenous community. So, again what is the difference between bioremediation, bioaugmentation and biostimulation? Biostimulation is basically alteration of the environment to enhance the activities affected by the indigenous microbes. We are not inoculating foreign organisms. However, in case of bioaugmentation, we are introducing or inoculating organisms to introduce a type of catalysis not displayed by the indigenous community. So, we are introducing some new community in that particular area to enhance the microbial bioremediation potential. So, that is called bioaugmentation. Now, I hope that it is clear what is the difference between intrinsic and enhanced bioremediation. So, what are some examples of natural bioremediation? Obviously, I have given here several examples. First of all, the bioremediation of chlorinated solvents like tetrachloroethylene, and then PCE, and basically for remediating these chlorinated solvents, or perchloroethylene and this tetrachloroethylene, we require anaerobic environment, and in the anaerobic environment, in the process of reductive dehalogenation, they generally the remediation process is governed by this reductive dechlorination process. Reductive dechlorination process, and this reductive dechlorination process ultimately produces the products of vinyl chlorides and ethylene. Let us talk about polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs. So, in case of PCBs, the environment is obviously anaerobic in nature, and the process is involved is reductive dechlorination, and in the ultimate products you will get that dechlorination, and dechlorinated PCBs are having less number of chlorine than that of the polychlorinated biphenyl, which is the starting point of this remediation process. Then obviously this BTEX stands for benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene and xylene, and these four compounds are degraded in the anaerobic environment, and the process is basically carbon assimilation, and ultimate products are biomass and mineralized BTEX. So, you can see that these are some of the examples of natural attenuation process, and this natural attenuation is again which what I have talked in my earlier slides, that is natural attenuation, although it is least expensive, but it takes a long period of time to remediate all these organisms, all these organic pollutants. So, this shows this graph basically shows transformation of a mixture of PCBs to less chlorinated congeners by live anaerobic sediment organisms, and these histograms basically represent the PCB mixtures analyzed by gas chromatography with increasing peak numbers corresponding to the congeners with increasing chlorine contents. So, obviously the PCBs in anaerobic environment transferred by reductive dehalogenation and mediated by the anaerobes both growth supporting and cometabolic mechanisms. Now, the cometabolism is a specific type of metabolism when two compounds are metabolized simultaneously, whether the metabolism of the second component depends on the presence of the first compound or component, and the key process of the environmental and this this reductive dehalogenation is the key process of environmental fate of PCBs in sediment, and remember that highly chlorinated PCBs are transformed preferentially than less chlorinated PCBs, and end products are also PCBs, but with a fewer chlorine atom than the parent compound, as I have told in my previous slide. So, this is one example of natural attenuation of polychlorinated biphenyls. So, what is so we have seen one couple of examples of the at a natural attenuation. Let us see what is the bioaugmentation. Let us see. Okay, bioaugmentation is an example of enhanced enhanced remediation, enhanced bioremediation. So, it should read as bio remediation, and this special this bioaugmentation basically special microbes which degrades the pollutants is introduced into the soil, and these microbes or microorganisms degrade the pollutants more readily than native population. So, these are two important features of bioaugmentation. And then biostimulation is assisting the degradation of pollutants by native microbial population is called biostimulation. Now, four major principles are followed to enhance the native microbial activity. You can see here, making the pollutant accessible to the microbes, that is by using the accessible to the microbes by using surfactants. In the surfactants, they have the capability by using their hydrophilic and hydrophobic hydrophilic head and hydrophobic tail. Using the hydrophobic tail, they can attract those nonpolar organic compounds, and these nonpolar organic compounds further they can make accessible to the microbes for further biodegradation, and they can provide sufficient nutrient source to the for microbes, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, and supplying the electron donor like carbon in the form of molasses, and supplying the electron acceptor oxygen through oxygen pumping to the microbes. So these are the four major principles we generally followed to enhance the native microbial activity. You know. Uh, by biostimulation process, and let us see one example of oil spill cleanup. And in the oil spill cleanup you can see that clearing the oil spill in cooler and nutrient poor region is very slower, and this is due to the lack of nitrogen and phosphorus for oil degrading microbes, and also slow reaction at low temperatures, and it is special oil soluble nitrogen phosphorus fertilizers are applied in this case. And apart from providing nitrogen and phosphorus, they also disperse the oil, making them more available to the microbes. So you can see here this is an oil spill treatment in control versus fertilized plots. So you can see in the x axis it is basically time after treatment in weeks, and in the y axis is basically index of crude oil remaining. So you can see that in the fertilized plot, obviously there is a steep decrease in index of crude oil remaining as the time goes on. However, so when we are adding the fertilizer in the form of nitrogen phosphate fertilizers, and obviously this will enhance the microbial activity to degrade the oil as compared to the control or unfertilized soil. So guys, we have talked some basic ideas about remediation of organic chemicals. We started with we started with different physical and chemical methods, and then we started talking about different bioremediation techniques. Let us wrap up here, and in the next lecture we will be starting from here, and we will try to finish this, and then we will be talking about different inorganic pollutants which are present in the soil environment. Thank you very much.